everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Reporting Norms, where we meet financial executives and talk about their current challenges and make it a learning session. Today's episode is brought to you and powered by High IQ, where we help companies implement software for their special needs. So today I have my guest, Tim Danser. I'd like to go and introduce him to you. He's a seasoned finance leader, entrepreneur, and former collegiate athlete with a passion for optimizing financial operations for startups. A graduate of Bellarmine College Preparatory in San Jose, California, Brown University, and the Wharton School, Tim built a strong foundation in corporate finance, investment banking, and commercial banking before moving into high-growth technology sectors. He played a pivotal role at Response Software as VP of Finance, leading its acquisition by FireEye, later Mandiant, and subsequently joining Google Cloud as head of cloud product operations. Now, as the founder of Finiti, he is redefining how startups manage finance operations, legal, accounting, and HR, bringing enterprise-grade financial expertise to fast-growing companies. He's also a CFA charter holder, and with an MBA from Wharton, coupled with his expertise in financial analysis, SaaS optimization, and strategic decision-making, Tim is dedicated to helping businesses scale efficiently. A former Brown Bears football player, he brings the same discipline and leadership from the field to the boardroom. Connect with Tim to take your startup further, faster, and smarter at Finiti.com.
FinitiNow.com.
All right.
When you want it right away, Norm.
FinitiNow.com, excuse me. FinitiNow.com is Tim's website. And we're going to dive in deeper on Tim and get to know him better. Now, Tim, you've had a varied career starting with investment banking. You've worked in corporate finance and startups. What drew you into the world of finance, and what's your perspective on finance and accounting within a company that has evolved over time?
Yeah. So first off, thank you for the warm intro. And second, getting into finance, it was, Norm, as you probably know, that finance for most folks seems pretty kind of narrow and specific on something. But with those in the day-to-day of it, it's quite vast. So when I started, what I loved is the numbers. I loved working with numbers. I had fun with it. And I started off my career thinking I really wanted to go into investment banking for the rest of my professional career. So I got the opportunity to go there. And what I found is it's a lot of great experience in terms of doing transactions and figuring out how to deliver a lot of results for a specific company. And then you move on to the next one. It's just the nature of the game in the investment banking world. And you mentioned a lot, which I certainly appreciate, of my athletic background. What I really loved is working with teams and working together to build and devise a strategy, and make something long-term. So that's when I made the shift on over to Symantec, where I got the chance to do strategic corporate initiatives. So things like divesting businesses and raising debt, harvesting cash flows, doing a lot of different types of evaluations for businesses. And it was a transition from banking transactions to corporate, which was interesting. But then I really found what I loved doing my time there was really like building something to sustain and grow in the future. And so through a few evolutions, I managed to find that I joined a teeny tiny startup. There was a few engineers in a room, and we got to do exactly that. Build the vision and say no limits to what we can do. We get to set the corporate policies and procedures, and we get to build how we want to run this thing. I think what's unique about startup finance is you're not necessarily running the show. You are an enabling function to guide everyone. And I was an offensive lineman by trade, so a lot of that blocking and tackling to get the touchdowns is what I love doing. So it kind of pairs a little bit of both of numbers and what I love, and that's how I ended up where I'm at today. And so when you talk about the range of different finance functions, investment banking, commercial banking, corporate finance, investment management, hedge funds, mutual funds, out of all of those, the ones that I really landed and resonated well with me were when you got to drive the strategy and build it and execute on it.
Okay. So you talked about Mandiant as really your entree into the startup world, and then a response software, and then Mandiant, and then ultimately got acquired by Google Cloud. So you've been through a couple of acquisitions. Um, what do you think are the some of the biggest, I'll call it financial or operational challenges that you kind of experience in each of those, acquisition experiences?
You know what's funny is the hardest part is actually the cultural adoption and shift. And you're used to everyone at a startup and even at an acquiree is used to running things the way they do things. And a lot of them have been doing it for years. The hardest shift is you go from one day our company is run this way to now it's run that way. And it's very hard for a lot of folks to say, I'm just going to completely do what I do differently now. I'm going to close the books differently. I have a different threshold for accruals. I do FP&A this way, where some folks care about $100 to $200 variances. Now all of a sudden, $1 to $2 million variances aren't as big a deal. So it's getting used to the processes and things and adopting to your acquire quickly. It's there are a number of challenges. Things like how quickly can we integrate? What are my intercompany transactions? There's a lot of nuts and bolts that go into moving from one to the next. But in my personal opinion, the biggest challenge is just saying, I'm going to do things the way my new business that has paid X number of dollars for, I'm going to do it their way. And that usually has always been the biggest challenge that I've seen.
And that's probably extra challenging when you know that the way you used to do it was probably a little bit more efficient and faster.
And you sit there and think through, if we only did it this way and, if we've got this kind of thing, I swear it'll be much better if we do it my way. But everyone has a boss, and your new boss doesn't want to hear that their way of doing it isn't the right way. And that's just part of like the cultural navigation of you are now no longer the head of the show anymore. It's now you are a supporting function within a supporting function at this point. So, and rightfully so, like a lot of this infrastructure is set up. There's a great example where I said, hey, why can't we sell? We bought this business. Why can't we just sell it as is? And they go, well, the problem is then we expose the entire business to EU GDPR laws. And so now we're risking billions of dollars rather than and so it's those things that you have to take a step back and go, I think I know how to do it right, but let me trust my manager and my person here that they know what they're doing. And they've been here for a while too.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally makes sense. So, kind of fast forward to the present, you started and founded FinityNow.com. Tell me what inspired you to start the venture, and what market are you specifically going after? Your target market, your ideal IDP profile?
Yeah, I would say you and I have shared a lot of experiences together. We were both at Symantec and got to work together, which was super fun. And I loved those times. And I went in after my MBA, I had all these great experiences at big tech. And so I really wanted to swing and try and take a gamble on my career. So I went to the startup Response Software. And we were very fortunate to get bought by Mandiant, and then fortunate again to get bought by Google. And each step of the way, there are things you see when you are by yourself and trying to build an entire division and get everything working and all the pieces running together. While it may be a little less big scale compared to some of the other ones, you get a sense of what you think is right and what you think is wrong. And then as I went and up the chain, it got harder and harder to see the big picture of what I was seeing before. And it let me really kind of drive into where I could add a lot of value. And that's the part I missed about. It's not that I couldn't be valuable to some of these other companies. I just really loved adding value at small businesses. And there's a lot of important processes and checks and balances that live within the large corporate entity world. But what I really love doing is just being handled a massive amount of archaic stuff and being able to work through it all to figure out what's the right way to organize this, and not fitting a square peg in a round hole saying, here's how accounting has to be done. And I know I'm going to apply the same principle across everyone, because every business has its own way of running. Some are high velocity, where they need a different tech stack than someone who is a large enterprise sales motion. And so I love the ability to be able to go in and try and tinker with things to make the business run as efficiently as possible and to provide clean transparency to all the stakeholders. And so that's what I did. I went in and shifted to say, I'm going to create a business where we're going to aim for really small businesses, series seed to C round, because that's where we add the most value. There's a lot of anarchy. You're getting hit with a lot of things all at once, and you just have way too many other things where a CEO, a founder, someone is dealing with a lot of the nuts and bolts of running the day-to-day of the business, tax returns and compliance filings and weekly or monthly accounting syncs, and the board comes in and they, rightfully so, they want to know what's going on too. And so that's where we really added a lot of value, and where I really love playing in is trying to get all the chaos, pulling it together and giving a clean business all squared away for a CEO or founder.
Yeah, makes sense. So you're targeting seed companies all the way to Series B. I imagine the founders and investors, they're interested in looking at financial KPIs and balance sheet, and probably more so an income statement and cash flow statement. But the back office may not exist robustly in those company sizes, right? And so you've come in and really tried to help create a environment of hygiene and getting their numbers in order. Is that where you find that you're adding the most value at that point?
I'd say yes, and there's a lot of ands to that statement.
So I would imagine, yes. So please expound upon that.
Yeah. So what I mean by that is you've got the basic building blocks. How much cash do we have in the bank? What are we burning every month? Like how many headcount do we have? That's usually where I start. We're not sure how much cash we're burning through. We're not sure how many, we have a general sense of how many people, but on a month to month and quarter by quarter, that's a little bit harder to just keep in the back of my head. On top of, for a poor CEO or founder, they're trying to build a vision, build a product, deliver against it, sell, market. They don't want to be thinking through, do I need to accrue for this prepaid or do I not? And so where we usually step on in is there's just a lot going on, and it's really, really tough to figure it all out. So a lot of the things we start off with are the basic building blocks that you and I are used to: cash, net cash burn, operating margin, gross margin, getting the usual blocking and tackling and the basic reporting requirements done. And a lot of that comes in with sometimes no one has had any accounting done over the last year, and they need you to literally start from the ground up. And then sometimes it's the books are a mess. Other times it's we feel like we've got a good control on the books, but we have no idea what's going on the FP&A front. Can you build a plan? Am I going to run out of cash in 6 months or 24? And how can I communicate that to the board? So it starts there, where it's cleaning, getting the building blocks going, and then we start tackling the more fun problems. Things like ARR and net dollar retention, gross dollar retention. How do we maximize for those? What are the strategies to take advantage rather than simply playing catch up and we're constantly feel like we're firefighting every single day? This typical engagement starts off that way. So it's funny. What we've done at Finiti is probably graduated 2 or 3 clients now, where you come on in and you go, your investor says, oh, we've got these books. And, I open them up and I look at them and I go, you're on a cash basis, right? And the investor goes, what? We didn't know that. So step 1 is converting from cash to accrual. And then from there, it's now that we've gotten that step done, let's start building out this portion and this portion. So the engagement gets bigger and bigger. And eventually what we like to do is let you know, this is a pulse check. Let me show you how much you're spending on us. And now we're starting to get to this point where it makes sense to go out and get someone. Because at seed to C stage companies, there's eventually a terminal velocity where you can go with someone outsourced, but they become so expensive that it just makes more sense to hire someone. And it's really helpful for someone to explain to you, this is that moment in time. And you're going to pay more for that extra full-time hire, but eventually he or she will lead this function better than, maybe not better, I should say, Norm, but they'll run it more efficiently than what we would do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. They can't do it better than you, for sure. Not better than Tim and Finiti Now.
Yeah, that's
or
right.
FinitiNow.com. But it probably makes some efficiency as they scale. So that
Yeah,
makes sense.
that's right. That's right. Yeah.
You meant, one of the things you talked about in your past writings and some of the knowledge sharing that you've done in the past is this concept of technology creep that is a silent killer for startups. Can you expound upon that? What do you mean by technology creep, especially in the context of startups?
Yeah, I'd love to. In fact, this kind of goes across the board, but where I'll start off as a specific example is a lot of times a CEO or founder will be faced with paying the bills. You have to pay your vendors, your lawyers, all that kind of stuff. And usually it gets to the point where there's too many invoices. There's just 50, 60, 80 invoices a month. I've got other things to do than worry about this. So a lot of the times, there's a lot of great vendor or procure-to-pay vendors that will process the invoice, take the cash out of your bank, pay the vendor, and put the accounting on through. And so one thing that we often see is prior to going out and buying more technology, look at what you have first. So a great example of that is a lot of clients at our stage tend to be in QuickBooks. And in QuickBooks, their premium package offers a vendor payment tool where QuickBooks will take the cash out, pay it to the vendor, and then when you have all of that process within your own internal tooling, it usually allows the accounting to go a little smoother than having to hook up more tools into your ERP. Another one that often tends to really creep up is CRMs, Atlassian, a lot of these little tools where project tracking and Salesforce management, the licenses just keep growing and growing and growing and growing and growing and growing, where you've got a lot of people and you just haven't spent the time cleaning out the licenses you do have. And so that's what I mentioned. First, do the hygiene within your own tooling tech stack, and then look for upgrade paths within your existing platform to see if there's a cheaper option, because I guarantee a vendor is happy to upsell if they solve a specific problem than necessarily going to yet another tool. And so a lot of the times payroll softwares, ERPs will have a lot of the basic building blocks that you need to scale.
Yeah, okay. If you find that as you go through the books of your client and you see either redundancies or something that's unused, you're more than happy to bring that to their attention because that saves them cash and helps them have better fiscal control over their spending, right?
So we just had a client who said to us, hey, you're going to manage all of our vendor payment stuff, and you just need to go in the bank and do this. And obviously for us, that's fun. We're happy to take on the work, but what we did in advance was let them know HR platform that's doing payroll and your books will both do that. You can do that already with your stuff. Let us set it up for you, and that way you can self-service. And we feel that adds more value than us simply taking more manual labor from you to do it. And the reason is that lets you scale the business and pass off that responsibility. So while we may manage, set it up and manage it in the short term, when you are ready to switch to a permanent hire, then the switch is seamless, as opposed to, I have installed this all myself and I've got it all and I'm the key to the kingdom, and now it's going to be super painful for you to get off of us. And so it's I just feel that that's more valuable to a client to let them know what we're doing, how we're doing it, and being transparent than necessarily finding ways to stay there forever and not going away.
I think your observation is exactly right, and I think applies to larger enterprises as well, where they have a tech stack tools that arguably aren't being fully utilized.
And I can tell you from teeny tiny startup up to Google, those opportunities exist where people don't spend it. And, like a good example, a counterpoint to what I said is one client of ours has 2 registered agents. So I said, let's consolidate. And they go, how much does it cost me every month to have 2? It was like $15 a month, And they go, the time spent on us consolidating isn't worth it for me rather than us doing other things. And I said, it's a great point. These are some of the things that we like to contextualize for everyone, is that sometimes it does make sense to double pay because the double pay is cheaper than what you would do otherwise.
Yep. Cost benefit.
There you go.
Go through that
there
analysis.
You go.
Yeah. For sure. So as you work with these startup companies, they're trying to balance growth as well as financial discipline at the same time, how do you advise your clients focus on this, not that, or focus more on this and less on that?
How much time do we have, Norm? How much is left in the podcast?
This is a big one. Yeah, I know. We could talk about it for a while. Yeah, please.
So where I usually start is depends on where are you at in the business cycle and where do you want to go? And what I mean by that is someone who's an A stage company, they've got maybe 5 customers, maybe 10. It's just about growth. Buy the growth as much as you can and make sure you deliver value to your customers so you can eventually grow more customers and get new logos that are repeatable and so on and so forth. Now, another company that also may be Series A, but has 50 customers, that becomes more of a signal of efficiency than necessarily grow at all costs. So these are some of the things that at different, I don't like to say financing stages, but at different business cycles that make more sense to say how you should start thinking of it. And so how we've been fortunate to work at companies that are in stealth mode all the way up to getting bought. And so someone in stealth mode should really focus in on building the product, getting logos, figuring out what is our business. And then at the next stage, when they get past those initial family and friends that have closed out, and you start getting more named logos and logos that are really kind of more organic, then becomes what is our repeatable sales model? What is the process that we have to fuel the engine? Be it if we're super inefficient with our spend or super efficient. Once you start fueling that fire, you see clients growing and growing and growing, you start leveraging more efficiency ratios. So the ones I like leaning on are magic number, customer lifetime value divided by customer acquisition cost, and CAC payback is another one. So there's a lot of, you could run infinite number of ratios, but there's a lot that investors will use among each stages to decide whether you are entering in hyper-growth phase, whether you're entering into growth and efficiency phase. And so there's a lot of great value in measuring those particular ratios.
Now, speaking about ratios, I would imagine that forecasting or predicting what some of those ratios might look like, and one of your expertise and specialty areas are creating the 3-statement forecasts, balance sheet, income statement, and cash flow statement, all interrelated amongst each other, where all the numbers tie out. I realize that some of those other, like CAC payback, some of those metrics may not be available within the financial statements themselves. However, have you ever been asked to prepare a 3-statement P&L forecast or 3-statement forecast, as well as what KPIs could look like, on a forecasted basis? Maybe you could just talk about, how you've done the 3-statement statements first of all, and then talk about the forecasting of that.
Yeah, so we definitely have. And I started out building 3-sheet models. The problem with the 3-sheet model, especially when you're doing a fractional CFO, is what I've seen is it's a big lift to do. It's a lot of work, and there's a lot of stuff embedded in there. And when you're dealing with a smaller business, you also have to go on your own trust journey with the client. So they want to kick around that model too and be able to understand it. What's funny is I don't find the 3-sheet model as valuable as doing some short change heuristics. And what I mean by that is, yes, in fact, one of our clients has asked for a 3-sheet model because they need it to go and talk to certain investors and lenders to negotiate their terms. So they need something like that. And it makes a lot more sense to build it out further. Someone who's more in the growth phase, you're better off going more high level. And why I feel that way is then a founder can understand it. Because if you show up to a meeting with a full 3-sheet model, someone's going to ask you, oh, that's cool. What's in your accounts payable? What's your accrued expenses? What's this thing? What's it? And then the CEO or founder is stuck explaining all that. And I find it more valuable to say, start off at a P&L. Let's build there. And then if you want this kind of thing, we could do a statement of cash flows. We translate into what we think the cash balance will be. And so how I like to describe it, it's like building a Lego set. You don't want to give a 3-sheet model to a founder and say, good luck, because then they're stuck halfway through the Lego set going, how do I finish the rest of this? I don't know what else needs to go into this. What I like to do is start small, start at the base. And then we'll put all the pieces together to make something meaningful and all that. And that way, he or she knows what's embedded in there so that they can clearly articulate how things are changing, evolving, updating. And then how I use that for building out historical KPIs and forecasts is when you talk, a lot of investors now judge businesses based on annual recurring revenue or ARR. And ARR, as you and I both know, is a non-GAAP definition. With that said, a lot of investors, when they say ARR, someone else can mean it entirely different. Some people define it as MRR times 12. Others people use last 12 months RevRec. You can use monthly RevRec times 12. None of them are wrong. But where I usually start with is saying, don't let me show you a bunch of metrics. Let's define what these are. So what is your ARR? Because when you go to your board or you go to raise more money, you don't want to have a different definition. You want to at least be super clear and transparent on what you are and what you aren't. Then what we start doing is saying, based on this annual recurring revenue, this upsell mechanic, this new ARR mechanic, then we can start building a lot of other metrics, like net dollar retention, gross dollar retention. And so the beauty of having a model, and if your business is ready for a 3-sheet model, is it allows you to put a lot of that intelligence and embed it in there for both historical and forecast to really drive a super clear picture on where your business is going and where it's been. It also helps you to say, hey, this massive spike here, that's not right. Let's go in and figure out what assumptions are driving that, on how to really kind of figure out and communicate what our story is going to be, because then that will guide the budget, that will guide how we go and ask for money and all those types of things.
Now, when you tracking these KPIs that the investors and PE firms or VCs are interested in monitoring, or the Portco CFO, how do you present that information? Is it typically in statement form or a dashboard, or what do you find to be the most effective way to communicate, these concepts and these numbers to the listener or to the viewer?
I personally like having pictures worth 1,000 words. So I always,
Right.
as simple as it may sound, I like pictures. I like bar charts. I like graphs. Sometimes I'll dabble in the tables, but I don't like throwing a bunch of statements and numbers at people because it's too hard to figure it out. And so visualizations I find to be the most helpful. And if you can do it with here's a heat map, that's really kind of nice to be able to tell the story of what you're trying to communicate. Just throwing a bunch of numbers in front of someone is super duper hard for them to interpret. The other two things I like leveraging are showing a trend and budget to actual. So having some sort of plan, budget, something to say we're either massively over or massively under, and knowing why that's the case, I think is incredibly valuable. And then also knowing that, hey, we've been here and we're going here and we think this trend will continue for X, Y, and Z reason. Just knowing that information and having benchmarks on how to run your business, I think is super duper helpful, especially as a lot of folks are now facing, I'm starting to see my pipeline freeze and I don't know what's coming up. So I need some sort of plan to judge on where are we succeeding or are we not, so we know whether we can keep on spending or we need to pull back.
Yeah. Okay. Pictures 1,000 words. I am totally with you on that. I do have to ask you the question. You worked at Google for a while in the cloud platform business. How can companies keep an eye on their cloud spend, or what are some, let's say, tricks of the trade that you could share about how to make sure that spend doesn't get out of control, or ways to monitor it so that you're getting the most effective and efficient use of your cloud access?
Yeah, it's a great question. So a lot of times there's an embedded reporting structure within all these CSPs. So I know AWS calls it their AWS Cost Explorer. GCP, I think they call it their cost utilization. There are different reporting functions in there. And oftentimes what you see is that the spend goes up and to the right. And so folks are going, how the heck do we control this? And what I've seen with a lot of these CSPs is you have one side speaking French and the other side speaking German. And so an engineer is saying, I need this, and this is how I run my environment. And then the finance person is saying, you're always over budget. We got to figure this out with the budget. We have to make it all work. What's funny is if you get someone to translate, you can usually find that both want the same thing. Rarely have I walked into a conversation and an engineer doesn't want to run optimally. They do want to run optimally. They just don't know how to look at dollars and cents. On the other side, the finance person wants to minimize the spend so you can deliver efficiency. And the engineer usually wants to do that too. But on the finance side, you don't know how many EC2s you need in order to support a full Kubernetes cluster. These are just the things that no one kind of teaches you in between how the two work. And
Yeah.
I hope you don't mind me going down a little bit of a rabbit's hole here, but what I have
Please.
found is there's usually three kind of key components. There's compute, there's storage, and then there's network. And those three are what drive a lot of it. And so one of the things that I found value in is looking through those cost reports on a daily basis. And what's funny about daily is usually what'll happen is when there's an anomaly, someone has triggered a workflow that they didn't think would do much, but then it massively increased the spend, then that day's usage and the day's cost will really show up very quickly. And so if you let that run for a long time, then you will overspend a ton. And then it will create a bunch of red flags. Now, on the other side, we had someone else who said, I'm going to take a team of 5 and clean up all our old stuff so that way we reduce our storage. And what I told them is, hey, that's only going to give us about $200 a month. You're better off going and doing this. So by understanding each other's perspectives and using the embedded cost reports on a daily basis, I found you're able to tease out a lot of the things where if you are just willing to work with whoever is very technical in their architecture that they're building, they'll want to do the same thing too. They want to know where they can spend time and money and use that money to go invest in other things.
In those instances where you review those daily reports and you see a spike, could anyone in the organization cause a spike because they kicked off a process, or is it generally limited to the IT department that kicks something off, or could it be, I mean, again, across the board?
Yeah, so it's usually the typical folks that'll do it are someone in DevOps or a site reliability engineer, someone who is building the actual infrastructure to support an application or software or a business in general. So what's funny is it's rarely, in the Eng org, you would think IT, they're the ones that control that. IT, in my world that I've operated in, is more for troubleshooting, where DevOps and site reliability engineers are in the world of building the cloud. And those individuals in particular are really good at spinning things up. And we could go into the evolution of how we kind of got here, but they usually want to right size everything. They want to spend the right way. They just don't know where to go to do it. And that's where, actually finance folks can add a lot of value saying, hey, I'm looking at this spend report. Let me share this report with you. Let me show you what I'm seeing and see if we can make this piece better. So it's the DevOps side of things that really are driving a lot of that spend, because they're the ones that are using it to build out the whole architecture to support a product.
I see. Is there a way to coach this, the DevOps or cyber folks in such a way to throttle or manage that usage? Or does it really have to be what it is, especially if you're in a product development mode?
I would say that there's a lot of little tricks you can learn pretty quickly. The biggest one is there's a great book called The Greater Game of Business where it talks about just having visibility into everything. If I can see, then I can find it. And if you're not willing to share, then no one's going to know there's a problem. And so walking an engineer through, let me show you my lens on how I see things. You see this big bucket here? And I'm going to use AWS because that was a world that I've operated in for several years. Rather, GCP we could talk to as well. It's really the same kind of theory. They just use different names. But a lot of the times you'll see this big bucket called Elastic Cloud Compute, or EC2s. And then above that will be S3, and that's storage. And then everything else is just kind of there. And so those EC2s, if you just walk an engineer and show them, hey, you see this? Let's start there. Let's start with the big bucket and figure out what's in the big bucket. And then we'll just go piece by piece in there. That's a really great place to start. Compute engine, virtual machine, or EC2, any one of those across the CSPs would be great. The other part that a lot of folks don't talk about is you and I are used to, if you prepay, you get a discount. That's just how it works. If you commit to something over 12 months, you get a more discount. If you do it over 3 years, you get a really big discount. And if you go month to month, you don't get any. Well, all of the CSPs have the same sort of thing. So in there's what's called savings plans. And everyone, again, has their own naming convention. where if you prepay, you can get 50% discount over 3 years. 1 year, you get 20%. So there's a lot of embedded discounting within all these CSPs as well. That would be great for finance to really kind of walk on through and discover and share with engineers and with DevOps leads to figure it out.
Very thoughtful. Thank you for sharing those insights. I think that's really helpful, especially with, most companies not really being on-prem.
Yeah.
Unless they're for limited reasons, right? They'll be on the cloud. So this is more of a general question about, your career. You've had experiences in the intersection between finance, operations, and strategy. So finance professionals that are listening to this podcast, what are some of the skills that you think that should be honed in on and developed in order to be someone, like yourself, who has had these experiences and is actually helping companies scale and be better?
And do you think of that from a value add or from running a more efficient business, or even both?
Let's start with value add, and then I think maybe from there the operations of the company will naturally come out of that. So
yeah.
Talk about value.
Yeah, so where I would say a lot of folks need to start is think of your audience of you're usually talking to someone who is running from a product issue and then trying to sell, and then marketing's got some information. There's a big lawsuit over here. And so this person who your audience is usually running around to 50 different things every day. And so start off with what he or she would know. So purpose of the meeting is this. And then here is the cash. And here's our P&L. Keep it super high level. Always keep it high level. And the reason I say that is when someone is running around every day with a million different things and going from thing to thing, you need to ground them and give them the purpose of what you want to cover with them and the point you're trying to make. And so if they have just hopped off of a big legal issue with one of your employees, and then you're going into this, they're probably still thinking of that. And you need to pull them into what you're talking about. I also say keep it high level because you need to have the weeds built out. A lot of folks, what they do in the finance and accounting profession is your mind's running really fast on those. You know it in and out. And you're worried that another person may not think you're smart enough. But having the weeds built out and then being able to say, here's the big picture. What usually happens is CEO is just trying to understand the next step and then the next step. Letting him or her walk through their way of thinking is more valuable than proving you know everything in the weeds. So I find it most helpful when you're communicating, start off at a high level and let them work through their own train of thought, rather than you walking through your train of thought first. Operationally, I would say take some cold calls, go in and poke around things. And I have found more often than not, a lot of finance professionals can look in and say, hey, do you integrate into my ERP? Great, you do. Show me that you do it. Don't just tell me. I want to see it on a demo with the whites of my eyes, that number move into that tool. And so those things are incredibly valuable to say, let me try and find something that solves this problem in an automated fashion, and being able to drag people through your process of making them do it.
Very, very insightful. That's awesome. We're getting close to the end of our time. So I just want to remind our audience that we're powered by High IQ, where we help companies develop software for their specific applications. And that's at highiq.ai. So my last question to you today, you originally from San Jose, went to one of the best high schools in San Jose, Bellarmine, then went on to an Ivy League school, Brown, MBA from Wharton. Tell us, the audience, what are some imparting words that you may share that you would give to your younger self at your start of the career, and what you would tell them, as their secret to success?
Oh gosh. Oh, Norm, that's kind of a loaded question.
The audience wants to know.
Yeah, I bet. what I would honestly say to my younger self is don't ignore the soft skills. And what I mean by that is I spent a lot of time, I got my CFA charter and, got my MBA, and I work in a numbers-based business where it's a lot of mathematics and hard quantification and reconciling this, and you need to have an opinion and a view and a range, and it has to be supported and documented and all that. And all of those are great. A lot of these things you can't do by yourself. You need a lot of people behind you. And so make sure that when you're building out something, be it your own finance function, or if you're by yourself in finance, that you can partner with others and be able to work with others on everything. And if you don't, you're not going to really be able to scale or have people buy into your vision in a long run. You need to have other people bought into this thing, whatever it is. And that's a lot of what I wish I knew down the road. It would have been nice to navigate through some of these things saying, hey, just because you know it doesn't mean someone else does. And just because you believe in it, it doesn't mean you don't have to convince others. So I would say really focus in on the fact that finance folks, while they have hard numbers and data and all that, focus on the folks that you're giving it to and you're trying to get to believe what you're seeing. So yeah.
Great advice, Tim. Well, we're just about at the end of our time. I want to thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. I wish you the best in FinityNow.com. If you're a startup company that is looking to clean up your books and help you scale, please give Tim a call at FinityNow.com.
Thanks for having me.
Right.
It's been fun, and it's super awesome to see you and be able to reminisce of the days of old at Symantec.
Indeed, Tim. Very, very good seeing you again.